Hey guys, I know it's probably a little longer than I usually do, but I wanted to come on here and give you my thoughts on last week's third episode of Dark Side of the Ring called The Final Flight of the Freebird, talking about Terry Gordy. And they did a good job here. I mean, even Michael Hayes tweeted out saying they did a good job. Almost very accurate, if you will. One thing that that he said that they didn't get accurate was, Terry's brief second run in WWE back in the mid 90s. They alluded that Michael got him a job, but Michael said he didn't know. And some people might say, yeah, say what you will, Michael, but I think we know you got him in there. You just don't want to kind of, I guess, be associated, with, how, what he was made into or stuff like that. And that's usually the case sometimes. Some people, from what I've seen in the wrestling business, will get their friends in, but the friends will be either under a mask or they'll be given a new gimmick or a new look, and when they let go from the company that they got them a job at, and later on, whether they're retired or whatever, unfortunately passed on, if their story is told and it's brought up that so and so that might still be alive got them into said company, that person, especially with today's day and age of social media, will come out and say, "No, I didn't," or they'll, do a video or whatever. They'll do some kind of communication saying, "No, I never got that person a job." But some people will be like, "Yeah, I think that's kind of hard to believe since, he was your close friend and you were there in a very high position or decent position. It's kind of hard to believe that you didn't have some say, you know." And some people, and those people, I should say, later on, those kind of people later on would admit that, yeah, we did kind of help them. But the reason we didn't want to admit it right off the bat is because we didn't like the gimmick, or the look or whatever they were given, because that's not who we wanted them to be. We wanted them to be them. And to me, in my personal opinion, I think that's why Michael Hayes, basically refuted the fact that he got Terry a job in WWE in the mid '90s, because he didn't probably like the gimmick they gave him, and I'll get into that in a moment. But they did a good job in everything on this. They talked about how he started. He dropped out of high school, dropped out of the ninth grade, and just wanted to be a pro wrestler from the age of 13, 14. And basically, within those first several years, proved to be very, very gifted for what he was able to do in the ring. And he main evented several places like the Superdome and other marquee cities and venues in that region, before the age of 20, which is pretty cool. Really, really cool. They talk about how, he was in the CWA. You could see it was the CWA based on the footage at a young age, where he brought in Michael Hayes. And the way they brought Michael Hayes in is they kept him, under, they hid his face under, it wasn't a mask, it was basically like a towel. They kept like a towel, if you will, over his face. And they showed when they revealed who he was, and basically he became the talker of the group. He became the talker, Michael Hayes became the talker of the group, and Terry was the power. And they mentioned that it was Michael's idea to adopt the name of the Freebirds, because of Leonard Skinner, and they live in that song. And it was also his idea for them to take the 8-track, because there was still 8 tracks at that time when they started, believe it or not, an 8-track tape, and have the person in charge of the PA system pop it in and say, play it as soon as we enter as soon as we get ready to enter the venue. And that's what they did. They played it, and Jim Cornette, I think he mentioned that, he was working, I don't know if the photographer or something at that time, and all of a sudden he's hearing this, and everybody is just starting to react, like, holy crap, what is this? This is new. So that got them over and everything, and then, of course, later on they brought in Buddy Roberts to be part of the team. They brought in Buddy Roberts to be part of the to make it a trio and everything. They did briefly touch upon the Von Erichs and Freebirds feud in WCCW, World Class Championship Wrestling. They didn't touch upon how it happened. The Tales from the Territory did. And the way they touched upon it, it says basically the Freebirds were more likened by the male fans compared to the Von Erichs. Kind of think along the lines of what John Cena went through for a while. John Cena was loved by the moms and the kids and the dads and the grown men, college men that were like, boo, we don't like Cena. Kind of think like that. But it was more along the lines of the Von Erichs were loved by the ladies, they were hated by the men. The ladies hated the Freebirds, they were loved by the men. So something like that. But they did briefly talk about it, but again, they didn't talk about how it happened, and it happened at the Christmas Star Wars event in 1982, the same night that basically the Freebirds were booked to win the inaugural 6-man tag team titles. Unfortunately, I think they said Buddy Roberts couldn't be there and everything, so basically, David Von Erich stood in. They won the titles, and David Von Erich surrendered, his title to the Freebirds for Buddy. And if the internet, I can tell you this right now, if the internet was a thing back then, and you had insiders like, let's say, Fightful Select and Sean Ross Sapp, in the know, there's no doubt people would pretty much know, okay, this is the night when they're going to do the heel turn, because, you would get all this info of this, how things were going to play out, or at least get an inkling of how things were going to play out. Anyway, they touched upon, they didn't touch upon that or anything, but what happened was, again, David, subbed for Buddy Roberts because he wasn't there, and he surrendered the championship, his third of the championship, for Buddy. And then later on that night, they had Michael Hayes as the referee in the steel cage match between Kerry Von Erich and Ric Flair. And there was a moment where both men were down, something happened, and, Michael is dragging Kerry over to, over to Flair, putting Kerry on top of Flair, but Kerry didn't want to win that way. He's like, no, that's not how I was raised to win. And he's arguing with Michael and everything. And what happens is Ric Flair gets up, sees this, pushes Kerry Von Erich into Michael Hayes. And as soon as, into the cage. He pushes Kerry into Michael Hayes, who gets pushed into the cage. And Michael, when he turns around, all he sees is Kerry. And Terry's the same way. Terry, all he sees is Kerry. And next thing you know, as soon as as soon as Kerry Von Erich is trying to leave the ring, Terry Von Erich slams the door in front of him and causes him visually to get busted open, very hard. Even though it's indicated that he might have bladed himself or something like that. Anyway, that kicked off the Von Erich Freebird feud. Now, they do mention that the Freebirds had a brief run in WWE, which, years ago I was kind of like surprised by. I was like, really? They had a run? But here's what they didn't mention. They mentioned, they had a brief run in there and everything, but here's what they didn't mention. And you can find this on YouTube and other outlets. Basically, they were brought in around 84, early 85, something like that, as part of the Rock and Wrestling Connection. That's what they were brought in for. Because there is a match, maybe two matches, where they're accompanied by Cyndi Lauper and her manager. Yeah. Cyndi Lauper and her manager at that time were accompanying the Freebirds. So that's why they were brought in. They were brought in to be part of the Rock and Wrestling Connection back in 84, 85. Unfortunately, the run didn't last too long because what happened is because the one thing they did go over in this episode is Terry liked to party. He was a party guy. He liked to go out, have fun, and everything. And the same with the Freebirds. The one thing about the Freebirds is they always like to, when they had the opportunity, to go out and party, just have a good time, stuff like that. Drinking some coffee there. I'm drinking some coffee there. But, they like to go out and have a good time, and Terry was probably the biggest partier out of them all, or out of the trio. So anyway, what happens is they party. I think I got to go watch the episode again, but I think they mentioned that they partied the night before. Terry more heavenly, than Michael and Buddy. And what happened is they go and they have a meeting with Vince McMahon, because I think word got out that, word got out to Vince that they were partying. They were kind of like getting too crazy. So both Hayes and Roberts were fine. Terry was not. And what happened is Terry decides, well, they're in a meeting with Vince McMahon to doze off and go. Now, I'm not saying he did that, but, I'm not saying he did that or anything, but I'm assuming, and I say this with all due respect and everything, I'm assuming that that's what got Vince's attention, because here you are, put yourself in the position of the Freebirds. Here you are in a meeting with the guy that's bringing you in to be part of this rock and wrestling connection that's going to go mainstream and help put WWF, which WWE was known as at the time, on the map. Make them more of a sports entertainment entity than they already were. Kind of take them out of that regional wrestling mindset. Think about it. You're in a meeting in Stamford, Connecticut, in Titan Towers at that time. You're in a meeting with Vince McMahon. Put yourself in their shoes. All of a sudden, the two of you that are part of this trio, you're fine, you're awake, you're listening to what he says. And then all of a sudden, you turn your head. All of a sudden, you turn your head. Vince, he's talking to you. He turns his head. And all of a sudden, you're hearing some kind of noise that sounds like snoring. And you look, and you see that the noise, this bit of snoring. I'm not saying he snored. He might have been a silent sleeper and everything. But how can they not know he had dozed off? Unless they heard something. And, they turn... And they, how? Because again, put yourself in those shoes. You're meeting with the guy that's bringing you in to be part of this, and all of a sudden the other third of your trio is just out like a light, and all you're hearing possibly, not saying it would happen, not saying it happened, but possibly all you're hearing is a snore. All you're hearing is a snore here and there. That's not a good look, right? That's not a good look. So apparently, because of that and some other incidences as well, that have been rumored about, like Andre the Giant, talked about how Michael Hayes came in drunk one time when they had a show at a high school, because yes, WWE, even back then, had shows at high schools, and they had some shows at high schools in the 90s to save money, believe it or not. But anyway, imagine, that word getting out that Andre is talking, that Andre points out that, Michael Hayes, another part, or the speaker, the mouthpiece of the Freebirds, is, coming in drunk at a live event, and it's like, you take all that into consideration, and it's not a good look. It's not a good look. So they got let go. They didn't talk about this. They briefly talked about it, but not really. After that, they ended up in UWF, they ended up in Mid-South Wrestling. They ended up in Mid-South Wrestling and the UWF, where Terry Gordy became the UWF heavyweight champion, world heavyweight champion. They didn't talk about that, because I'm kind of surprised about that. They didn't talk about it, but yeah, that's what happened. As far as I remember, because I know he went to Japan. They did talk about that, and we'll get into that in a moment. But I think in between going from WWE straight to Japan, in between he was also, competing in Mid-South, which became UWF, the first UWF under Bill Watts. And he became the UWF champion. So yeah, between him, getting fired from WWE and going to Japan, in between that timeline, as far as I can remember, and recall as a fan, he was doing Mid-South and UWF. And if you want more proof of that, the WWE Network has a documentary on World Class and everything. And I think they even have, and I think you can find here on YouTube, I should say, as well as on the network, several episodes of Mid-South when it was also UWF that showed Terry as the champion. So they didn't touch upon that, but they didn't touch upon that, which I guess because it was brief, they didn't feel like doing it. But they did touch upon his first run in Japan, or one of his first runs in Japan, and he basically became what is known as a gaiju in wrestling over there. And he became a big name. He became a very big name in everything. He became the first, as far as I think they mentioned, became the first to win the All Japan Triple Crown during that run. But basically, what happened is the schedule and the way they worked in Japan, which is vastly different than what they do here in the States, was taking a toll on him. So what happened is, he blew out 2 of his ACLs, or both ACLs. So he was still working. But he had to get surgery eventually. So that took him off the road. But when he got back, he went back to Japan. He went back to Japan and wrestled, and that's when he met up with that's when he got paired up with Dr. Death Steve Williams, and they were known as the the Miracle Violence Connection, the Miracle Violence Connection, and I do remember seeing them as a tag team in WCW because I was kind of going back and forth, like I said, like I've mentioned before in previous videos, audio videos and stuff. I would basically, kind of flick through the channels when wrestling would be on and try to see if there was any more wrestling, even as a kid. Because AWA I would watch, being homeschooled and everything, and then even after getting home early from school, doing kindergarten and stuff and things like that, I would watch AWA because that was like, oh, what's this? Not knowing much about it. And I think that was because I was watching Rock and Wrestling too. So I was thinking, I want to see if there's anything more like this. And that's how AWA got my attention. Also because Sergeant Slaughter was over there. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, I'll check this out. But anyway. And the Freebirds did compete in AWA too, but they didn't touch upon that. Basically, I would flick through channels at times. And I was doing this, not as much as I would later on. Because it was like late 89 into 90 that I really started to get back into it. Or really started to get into it, I should say, more so than I was as a little kid. So, I mean, I was still a kid. I was going to be I was like 10, 11, going on 11. And I started to really get more into it back then than I was as a kid previously. So anyway, I remember watching some wrestling throughout that time frame. And it was during the time frame where my family was kind of transitioning a little bit. We were going through like a transition. And what I mean by a transition is we were living with our here's the thing. We lived in Waterford, California, moved from there, briefly lived with my grandparents, got a house on the Hayward-San Lorenzo border, if you will, from I'm assuming 90 to 91 or something. I can't really not 91, but I'm assuming from like 91 to 92 or something like that. I can't really recall or anything. But it was like, cause I know what happened afterwards. I think it might have been, very briefly, we lived with my grandparents for about a month or two in 91, and then we moved, like I said, over to Miquelon. We moved over to Miquelon Avenue and everything in the Hayward-San Lorenzo border. And I remember during that time frame, again, I was flicking back and forth on the shows. And I remember seeing Terry Gordy and Steve Williams, on my television set because, WCW would be syndicated outside of TBS. So I remember watching that and seeing them holding those tag titles. And I think that was around like 91 into the beginning of 92 because we were, like I said, we were still living and everything, on Miquelon Avenue. I think we lived on Miquelon Avenue from, I would assume, the spring of 91 to about, the spring of 92. That's my assumption. I'm not really sure. But yeah, it was about that time frame because my older sister had gotten pregnant basically around November of 1991. And she was pregnant with my niece, my oldest niece, if you will, who's a mom now to my great niece and great nephew. So anyway, I remember it was around that time frame, like I said, 91 to then. But again, I do remember it was a brief period. I do remember no, actually, now that I think about it, I think it was we moved from Waterford to Micklin, and then briefly we lived with my grandparents because because my dad wanted to move back to Kansas, but that's another story for another time. But anyway, I do remember during that time frame. Don't want to get off track here. Tuning in and seeing them holding the belts from late '91 into '92 and all that. So yeah, they held those titles, and that's one of those teams that when they grab your attention, you're like, "Oh man, this is an interesting tag team." Very interesting. So like I said, that got my attention. That caught my attention and everything. And anyway, they did touch upon how they became a tag team in Japan, and how they were very dominant. Won championships in both countries. With WCW, NWA, and All Japan and all that, and even New Japan. I think at one time they held the All Japan, New Japan, and the WCW, NWA tag team titles all at once. I think they did. Anyway, getting back on track, they do talk about, and they had clips from an old RF video shoot that they did with Dr. Death Steve Williams before he passed. And this is like years before he passed. Where they talk about where Dr. Death talks about Terry's first overdose. Because again, Terry liked to party and everything, drink, and also take pills. And they talked about, like, when Terry went on his first trip to Japan, he took these pills. I can't think of the name right now, but these are the kind of pills that you take to help you sleep. And then you spend the next day sleeping them off, resting them off and everything, and then you're good to go. Well, they talk about, they have the clip from Dr. Death Steve Williams' interview, and Williams is talking about the first time that Terry had overdosed in Japan. And that basically, he had to slap him across the face to help him come out of it, and they did. They helped him come out of it a little bit, but he ended up in the hospital for about 2 days, in a coma for, I think they said it was 2 weeks, not 2 weeks, but a coma for like 2 days, 2 weeks, something like that. Again, I gotta go back and watch. But yeah, he got out of it. He came out of that one, and he was fine. He was okay. But, you could tell, something's, things were changing with him. But he seemed fine. He seemed okay. He seemed fine. He seemed okay and all that. So, again, that was the first time. And everything was all right after that. He came out of the brief coma he was in and all that. And, they got back to being a team. But then the second time they went to Japan, that's when he almost OD'd fatally on the plane. Because what happened is they started hearing the sound coming from him, and they noticed his face was turning blue, and then that's when it dawned on them, oh shit, he's not breathing. And I think they said he took something before then as well that he shouldn't have taken. And basically he was over ODing, if you will. He was ODing to, like I said, almost fatally. And Steve Williams tried to slap him and everything, tried to wake him up, like he did last time. Didn't work. He got the flight attendant over saying, hey, we got a problem here. We need help. So so apparently, I don't know who contacted, who contacted the hospital, but they were basically like 25 minutes, a half hour from landing in Japan. So they land in Japan, the ambulance is there, they take him to the hospital, and he ends up in the hospital for several weeks or something like that. And his nephew, who's also a wrestler, because they talked to him in this episode, they talked to him. They talked to Jim Cornette. They talked to David Manning, who was the booker and referee in World Class. They talked to Jimmy Garvin, gorgeous Jimmy Garvin. They talked to Ray Gordy, who was Jesse and Festus, who you now know as Luke Gallows in WWE, as part of the Good Brothers. You know, they talked to him. He was also known as Slim Master J. So they talked to Ray Gordy, who did not recognize. Who, believe it or not, I did not recognize because he put on some weight. No offense, he put on some weight, but I did not recognize him. I'm like, okay, this guy is his son, but it wasn't until they show footage and he mentioning who he was, I'm like, holy crap, that's who it is. Because like I said, he gained some weight and everything. And I think he's retired. Anyway, they talked to him. They talked to his daughter, Miranda Gordy, who works on the Independents, and I'll tell you honestly, these Dark Side of the Ring shows, they do get the attention of some of the bigger promotions, so, don't be surprised if maybe you start hearing Miranda Gordy's name get, floated around as possibly going to WWE via NXT, AEW, TNA. Don't be surprised by that, if it happens. But they talked to him and everything. Like I said, they talked to his nephew, who was also a wrestler, that worked in Japan alongside him. So they talked to some a lot. They talked to some decent people and everything. A good amount of people, I should say, and everything. They talked to Mick Foley as well, who wrestled against Terry and was also in WWE when Terry showed up for the second run. So they talked to a good amount of people, and basically, like I said. Terry ended up in a coma for a lot longer. Like I said, the second OD was almost a fatal one. And basically, what happened is it wasn't fatal, but it was permanent. But it caused near permanent brain damage. It didn't cause him to be in a wheelchair for most of his life and losing all his motor skills completely, but it caused significant semi-permanent brain damage to where he had to relearn a lot of the things he used to do, mostly when it came to wrestling. He had to relearn how to grapple and all that. And I think it was his nephew that helped him out. Like I said, his nephew was also a wrestler, so his nephew helped him out, kind of relearn all those things and everything. And he got basically the hang of it again. And he was trying to speak again normally, trying to when it comes to promos and everything, but it just wasn't the same. It just wasn't the same because because of the fact that when he would do promos for local televised wrestling shows or even shows that were just for tape and everything that would be sold as VHSs or on VHS. You would just see a glassy look in his eye, like you knew something was off, in a big way. And they did touch upon this. They touched upon the fact that when Jim Cornette found out about what happened to him in Japan, but then found out, hey, he's getting back to, the basics, relearning, getting better, kind of getting back to the in-ring, Terry Gordy that he was, or at least close to it. He wanted to bring him into Smoky Mountain Wrestling. SMW, Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and he said he wanted to bring him in, and they show footage of him being brought in as part of part of Jim's militia, because Jim Cornette, no matter where he would go, he'd always have a stable, always have a stable of guys, or he'd have a tag team managing here and there, and so in Smoky Mountain he would always have the Heavenly Bodies, he would have certain individuals like the Beldrum guy, I can't think of his name again. The guy that was known as Bruiser Beldrum or something like that. So he would bring these guys in, managing them individually and then grouping them up into a faction. And he brought they showed footage of him bringing Terry Gordy in as part of his militia group. But you could tell that Terry couldn't, do an interview correctly, so Jim would mostly do all the talking, and Jim basically said that you could just tell, and you could see it in the footage of the show. Terry was just so glass-eyed that it's like that old saying of the lights on but nobody's home, and that's basically what it was for him. For Terry, he was like lights on, nobody's home. So they did some stuff with him there in Smoky Mountain, but obviously knowing that. Yeah, he could do the moves and everything, but, he's not all there, because Jim even mentioned, he mentioned this on his Experience podcast when they were previewing Dark Side of the Ring for this season, as well as he talked about it here, in this episode. He said that one time he turned around and Terry was right there, and it was on the day of a show, or not on the night of a show. He turned around and Terry was right there, probably standing there for like, who knows, 18, 20 minutes, and this, not doing anything. And Jim's like, can I help you with something? And he's he's asking in the best way he can, do you think it'd be okay if I did the powerbomb? Because one of the ways he'd finish off his opponents is he would powerbomb them. Before that became a very well-known maneuver. And Jim's like, yeah, if you want to do the powerbomb, Terry, that's okay. So, yeah, obviously Jim knew it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to work in everything in Smoky Mountain. He knew it wasn't going to work or anything. So, yeah, the stay in Smoky Mountain didn't last too long. And then, because like I said, they're talking to a lot of people here. And they mentioned, they talked to Mick Foley, and I was kind of maybe hoping they bring this up because, like, why would you have, Mick Foley there unless he had something to do as part of, or he was a part of Terry's career in some capacity. And I'm kind of glad they brought this up. Basically, Mick Foley, because when they have the talking heads introduce themselves, they show a little bit of footage of what they do, if they're a wrestler or they used to be a wrestler, and they show footage of Mick, I should say, not Mickey, but Mick, from his, coming to the ring, in '94 as part of the IWA King of the Deathmatch tournament, in Japan, and he's carrying this cross with what looks like to be thumbtacks on the back, or yeah, thumbtacks on it, I should say. So so when they had Foley introduce himself and they showed that footage, I'm thinking, oh, they got to talk about, the match Terry had with him. And they did. Because even Foley, again, because word had gotten out what happened to Terry, right? So Foley basically doing this match with Terry Gordy in the King of the Deathmatch stuff was, basically telling Terry, hey, you need to really potato me. You need to really bring those punches like they mean something. You really got to bring them. And, Terry, in much to Terry's credit, according to Mick Foley, he did. And Mick felt that, for that one brief moment, they turned back the hands of time and we got the old Terry Gordy back and everything. And they even show footage, I think, of Terry doing a post-match interview as best he can. He said something, but it felt like, according to Mick, that the old Terry Gordy was back just for that brief moment. But, obviously it didn't last too long, and, again, things just were not the same. They just were not the same. And they talk about the fact that WWE brought him in as the Executioner in the mid-90s. This is around the time when Paul Bearer had betrayed Undertaker at SummerSlam, aligned himself with Mick Foley as Mankind, and had this vendetta against the Undertaker. So, basically, they talked about, I'm trying to think about the right words to say here, thinking about what the right words to say here. They talked about the fact that Terry Gordy, as I mentioned, was brought in as the Executioner, and they hid his face under a mask, and Miranda Gordy was very happy that they did that out of respect, because obviously they knew, hearing upon about what happened in Japan, that yeah, he could go now, but if people see him as Terry Gordy, and they're gonna see something they don't want to see, and again, that was out of respect, for him. But what's crazy about that, though, and I'm just thinking about this right now, is 7 years later when they did, because again, they interviewed his son Ray Gordy, who was Jesse, it's part of Jesse and Festus in WWE. About 7-8 years later, they do that tag team, and they have Luke Gallows as Festus, kind of in the Mice and, doing a play off the Mice and Men characters. And basically, they have they have him acting like, he's out to lunch. Like, he doesn't know he's not all there, but as soon as he hears the bell ring, it's like, he's a monster. He's a crazed monster, and as soon as the bell rings, he's back to being, and everything. And I say that with all, and I do that with all due respect, no offense. But anyway, basically, I'm just thinking about this. I'm like, they have respect to put a mask on Terry, because they know what happened to him and they don't want people to see him that way. But yet, 7-8 years later, they're willing to do what they did with someone like Luke Gallows, portraying, someone that basically was that's basically portrayed as being in the same kind of, mental, capacity that Terry Gordy was. And it's like, okay, you have respect for the guy here, which is great. Put him under a mask so nobody sees, what he looks like or anything, and he's not embarrassed. He doesn't come off as a public PR nightmare for you. And yet, when you do go public, years after you go public, you decide to do this. To me, that's just crazy. That's just crazy. I don't understand that and everything. And maybe I'm just grasping for straws here and all that. But it's like you have respect for the person not being able to, motor skill, I guess you could say mentally, be able to act like himself anymore, but he can still go in the ring as best he can. And yet, you're presenting this character being portrayed by someone that's, completely focused, functional, and all that, but you present him in the first major gimmick as somebody that's, in the same capacity that Terry was in real life, and that a lot of people are in real life. And it's like, talk about a PR nightmare, in my opinion. And I think that's why the Jesse and Festus thing didn't last long, because that got under. I think reports got out that got under the skin of a lot of people, especially big corporations and outreach programs and all that, and it made things bad for WWE. Anyway, I'm not trying to make comparisons and all that, if you will, in the wrong manner. I don't want people to take this in the wrong way, but I'm just thinking it's like, years before you go public, you hide that years before you go public, you, out of respect, you hide the guy's face under a mask, which is good. That's great. But then after you go public, you decide to take a chance and do what you did with. Again, I'm not trying to make people take this the wrong way. It's just, you talk about Vince McMahon, especially a lot of things going out there about him nowadays. It's like seriously, what is this man thinking? I don't know. You think hiring his son and pairing his son with it? I mean, I could tell you honestly, I don't think Ray really liked that. Honestly, I don't think he really liked that. But hey, it's a job, it's money. What are you gonna do? And maybe he was good with it. Maybe he was cool with it. Who knows? I don't know. But I just feel it's like just very confusing now that I think about it. It's just like, come on. It's like what? It's like I don't get it. And hopefully I'm not the only one that picked up on that. But anyway, getting back on track, they brought him in as the executioner, put him under a mask out of respect, and everything. And he was brought in. It was during the Buried Alive match, the first Buried Alive match between Undertaker and Mankind. And then they had him, they showed footage of him having a match at In Your House against The Undertaker. And it was The Undertaker, according to Jim Cornette, that said, yeah, this isn't, not just Jim Cornette, but also Mick Foley, that said, yeah, this is not going to work because the match wasn't the best match Undertaker could have with someone like this, someone like Terry Gordy. Because Terry Gordy, and they didn't shy away from this, regular, post-OD Terry Gordy, you put him in the ring with Undertaker, you got a recipe for a masterpiece, if you will. You got a recipe for, a slobberknocker beyond belief. But this Terry Gordy, this iteration, not good. Not good. And Taker said, yeah, this is not going to work. And they kept him around for a little bit, but Mick even mentioned that because Terry was, still taking pills, because he mentioned that on a flight, Terry was just sitting next to a lady who was taking some pills herself. I'm assuming medication pills, and he, prescribed medication pills, I should say. I don't know, can't really say, but anyway, basically Terry's asking her, hey, you got any more? Or you got, not any more, but you got any extras? And the lady, I guess not asking why he needed them, just gave them to him and he took them. And according to Mick Foley, he would take, any kind of pill. He didn't, whether he had a prescription for it or not, he would take any pill, if you will. He would take any. And he said it got to a point that Terry would just wander off. On the day of a show, whatever, he would just wander off from the hotel. And him and Paul Bearer, Percy Pringle, had to go find him. They would get in a car and go and find him, shout out his name and everything, because he was, again, mentally, because of what happened on the second OD, just was not all there. It's like, wrestling wise, he was okay, but mentally, he was out to lunch. He really was. He was out to lunch. But yeah, after that, they're like, yeah, this is not going to work either. So he got let go, went back onto the independents for a while, and stayed there. And the benefit about that was he got to be at home, with, spend more time with his family. His kids were grown up and everything at that time, or at least growing up at that time. His son, I think, was living on his own at the time, that being Ray Gordy. And, they would spend time. Ray would go pick him up, take him wherever he needed to go sometimes. So they got to, know each other a lot better than they did when they were kids. When, Ray and Miranda were kids. So yeah, they were, spending more time with him because he would be taking independent bookings. And Mick Foley brought this up, that it was during one of those independent bookings that Terry was, and they show footage of this too. Terry would be sitting at a table and Noah would come to get an autograph from him or want to take stuff like that. And Mick even said that there was one time they were both booked at a show. Mick mostly like for signing autographs, greeting meets and all that. That, Terry being one of the people that would go in the ring and compete. And I know this kind of stuff, and I know what they're talking about, because when I would go to Central States Wrestling in Lawrence, Kansas, because Lawrence, Kansas was the home base of Central States Wrestling, and they brought in some top-tier TNA talent, I got my picture, and I got my picture taken with the likes of Christopher Daniels, Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, Abyss. I got my picture taken with the late Jason Stryford, Daisy Hayes, Delirious, Sanjay Dutt. So I got my picture taken with a lot of them. But I know what they're talking about. When you have an attraction, what's supposed to be an attraction as a wrestler, in-ring competitor and all that, booked for a show. And Mick remembers that he's, sitting at the table, and only like one or two people went into the ring to get that picture taken with Terry, and Miranda was taking the pictures for her dad doing this. She was there with him, but only one, two, maybe three people took pictures with him. And Mick, basically, he felt like getting on the PA system. He said this is how he felt. He felt like getting on the PA system and telling them, hey, don't you get it? That's a legend in the ring. Pay more respect to that guy. Go to him. Get his autograph. Get pictures taken with him. But, he didn't. He didn't do that, but he felt like doing it. He said he felt like doing that. Anyway, they talk about how Terry, was supposed to team with Ray on an independent show in 2001, but that didn't happen because Ray, I think, may have been... I don't know if Ray got signed for WWE at the time. It was in OVW. I'm not really sure. But he couldn't do it. So Terry's nephew, I'm trying to think about the right words to say here. Terry's nephew stood in for Ray and tagged with him. He tagged with him, but unfortunately, from what they showcased and talked about here, that tag match would be the last of Terry's career because what happened the next day, or at least something like that, or a day or two afterwards, Ray's on the phone, with his cousin, and his cousin's telling him, get on your knees and pray. Your dad's OD'd again, and it seems to be fatal. He said something like your dad's on the mountain, has climbed the mountaintop, or gone up to the mountains, or something like that. But basically, he told him, get on your knees and pray to God above. Your dad stopped breathing. And, Ray, Ray was in shock. He rushed over there, wanted to get in. The police didn't let him in, but he pushed the police aside, saying, let me in there, that's my dad. And, Ray and Terry's nephew, Richard, that's his name, Richard, tried slapping him in the face, just like Dr. Death did anytime this would happen, but it was too late. All he was doing was, slapping away at the face of a soulless body, because Terry had passed on. He was gone. So yeah, that was unfortunate. He passed away at 40 in 2001. So you can only imagine that if he had kept himself sober, what could have happened. Because a lot of people look at a guy like Terry Gordy and stories like his, similar to his, and they're like, man, what if this guy would have kept himself sober? What if he would have kept himself clean and everything? What could have been? And unfortunately, we'll never know. And it was bad. It was, that third OD, they say three strikes, your third strike, you're done. This was Terry's third strike. It was his third strike and everything, and it took him out. Now, according to some people like Monster and others that have reviewed this episode, they brought up some other things that, Darkseid didn't. And what they brought up basically was Terry was in Japan when WWE would, in the early 90s, co-promote with, outlets like New Japan and All Japan and all that. Terry Gordy was supposed to be the one, not Stan Hansen, the man that basically is credited with, inventing or innovating the lariat clothesline, the clothesline from hell. Basically, Monster went over this, saying that, Terry was supposed to be, again, not Stan Hansen, but Terry was supposed to be the one to face, Hulk Hogan, and Terry pulled out because he didn't want to do the job to Hogan. So Stan Hansen stood in for him. And also he brought up, Also he brought up the fact that Terry Gordy was backstage, I think about a month or a week before he passed, at a 2001 SmackDown taping, and chatting up with Michael Hayes and Jim Ross and others, and apparently he seemed to be in good spirits. He seemed to kind of be like sober again, kind of back to the old Terry again. But unfortunately, it didn't last long because again he ended up ODing. He stopped breathing a week later. And the other thing they didn't bring up was, for his funeral, and Monster touched upon this, because, because some people did touch upon this as well with, like with John Tenta and Gene Okerlund and stuff, that not many people showed up at the funeral. Basically here, though, over 300 people showed up for Terry Gordy's funeral. 300. And not just family and friends, but wrestlers, legends, people that he's been in the ring with, teaming with, and opponent-wise, rivals and all that, all showed up. They all showed up for his funeral. And unfortunately, it was a ending of a career way too soon. It was unfortunately the ending of a career way too soon. The good thing about it is during this episode, they would transition sometimes. And one of the things they would transition to, towards the end, is you see Terry doing the powerbomb finish in All Japan. And they showed, transitional wise, they showed as he's doing it, they show his daughter Miranda doing it. You know, they showed that. So she's carrying on the legacy independently as far as we know right now. And Ray, again, I think he's retired. If he comes back, that'd be great. I think he could probably have another year or two, you know, in the business. But yeah, his legacy still continues with his daughter. And they didn't talk to his other daughter because maybe I think she declined to comment. Other footage they did use was brief footage from his time in ECW and everything. And I think that was even post second OD where basically he wasn't all there or something like that. He wasn't all there, but he could still go. You know, he still can, you know, do the moves and everything. And he did have some matches in ECW, matches with Raven. He had matches with Terry Funk. And they were decent, and they were pretty good. They were hardcore, violent matches. And again, he could still go. He could still do the stuff. But again, but otherwise, you know, it was like lights on, nobody's home kind of deal. Lights on, nobody's home. But yeah, again, a career, you know, ended too soon. And again, as Solid Monster, to quote what he said, it's one of those what if stories. It's one of those what if stories. So yeah, I'm getting some more coffee there. So yeah, it's a sad ending, but I'm happy. I'm happy his daughter and briefly before and for a time before that, his son were and are carrying on his legacy. You know, carrying on his legacy. I'm glad about that. I'm glad that his son Ray, as Jesse and Slim Master J, was carrying on his legacy in WWE, and I'm glad his daughter's doing the same in independently. And again, like I said, I would not be surprised. And Miranda Gordy, if you're listening, I would not be surprised if you get a phone call or an email, or a text, or whatever from WWE, AEW, and TNA. I would not be surprised. You know, because of this episode, I would not be surprised. So be on the lookout for that, girl. I got a feeling you might get a call. And you know what? You know, you being Gordy, you being Terry's daughter, I would not be surprised if, out of respect, if you go to WWE, maybe AEW, maybe TNA, that one of those three give you a proper run, you know, in a tribute to your father. So we'll see. We'll see, though. But yeah, it was a good episode. Like I say, sad ending, and you know, hopefully he go. I mean, the Freebirds are in the Hall of Fame. I know that, but individual wise, he needs to go in by himself. He does. Him, Buddy Roberts, Jim Garvin, and Michael Hayes individually need to go in on their own. You know, they need to go in on their own. Period. But anyway, it was a good episode. Like I said, sad ending, but his legacy's continuing. And that's a good thing. Tonight, because I am recording this on the day that the new one, the 4th episode, comes out. Tonight, they're going to talk about Brutus Beefcake. Yeah. They're going to talk about Brutus Beefcake, and mostly it's going to focus on the sailboat, hold on for a sec. Hold on. Sorry, I was trying to think about the right words to say. The pale sailing accident that basically destroyed his face and nearly ended his career, if not his life. So they're going to talk. They're going to do so they got the episode tonight on that. And thank God, just like with Marcus Bagwell, they do have the man himself to talk to. So I'm looking forward to that. And that's all I can really say. So let me know what your guys' thoughts were on Dark Side of the Ring last week on Terry Gordy. What were your thoughts on it? What stuff do you think myself and Solid Monster and others that have talked about this episode left out? Let me know down below in the comments and in the live chat if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel, like the video. And like I said, give me your thoughts. And until next time, guys, I will talk to you all later. And until then, have a good day.